Hello, Mindvalley book lovers. This is Kristina Mandlakiani, co-founder of Mindvalley and the host of Mindvalley Book Club, and welcome to my weekly interviews. So today we are going to discuss this wonderful book, Start Making Sense. It is the book of the week by Mindvalley Book Club, and you know how rigorous we are picking the books. And even after we pick the book, I read through the book. Sometimes I think, yeah, it's good. This time I was like, yeah, that's very good. I was also hoping to that my kids actually will read it. I don't know, maybe I'll give it to them when we go on holiday. So my guest today is the author of the book, Start Making Sense, Stephen Heine. Hi, Stephen, and welcome to Mindvalley.
Hi, Kristina. Thanks so much for having me.
And before we go into the conversation, I have to give a little introduction to my guest, my usual short introduction. So Stephen Heine is the professor of social and cultural psychology in the University of British Columbia. He's also the author of the textbook Social Psychology, which is amazing, or Cultural Psychology, let me see. Cultural Psychology, sorry. He's the author of the textbook Cultural Psychology, and this is so exciting. I don't think I've ever seen authors of textbooks. They are those mythical unicorns, in my opinion. But he's also the author of two books, which are nonfiction books with more commercial value. One of them is DNA is Not a Destiny, and the other one is the book we are going to discuss right now, the news book Start Making Sense. Stephen also is an award-winning researcher into cross-cultural cognition. You research existential psychology as well, quite extensively,
Yes.
and the psychology of meaning. And Stephen is also fellow of Royal Society of Canada, which is a scientific institution, obviously, and has been a professor in the universities both in Canada and Japan. And if I've left something out of this short bio, which I had to reference a few times, please do correct me and add. Right now would be a good time.
No, that was really good.
So Start Making Sense. As I said, this is the book of the week by Mindvalley Book Club. I hope you have had a chance to look into it or read it or get it. And if not, do it. We'll share the links, obviously, under the recording. And here in this session, I want to ask a few questions. Some of them will be about the book and actually maybe cover some of the topics from the book. But very often I like to go a little bit off what's in the book and go discuss something which is relevant, but maybe not necessarily covered in the book, if that's fine with you, Stephen.
Sure.
The first question I want to ask, so the premise of the book is that in the 21st century, we are starting to lose meaning and we live in what you call the existential vacuum. So I wanted to ask, why is this happening? And do we have less meaning in our lives nowadays in the 21st century compared to, let's say, 100, 200 years ago?
Yes, I do think we're living in an existential vacuum, and meaningful lives are getting harder to come by. And I think a good way of understanding why this is happening and how this is happening is to think a little bit about what meaning actually is. And meaning is ultimately about connections. So you can think about meaning in a variety of ways. So you can think of the meaning of anything, such as your book club, and think of, well, what does a Mindvalley book club mean to you? And it probably means all of the different kinds of experiences that you can connect to it. It means like your, the guests that you've had on, the relationships that you formed, your favorite books, the challenges you've had, the frustrations you've had, all of those things. Ultimately, these connections, things that we connect to, come to make up the meaning of this. You have the book club for you, and if any of these things dramatically changed, so would the meaning for you. And it's similar with when we talk about meaning in life, but now it's about the key connections with our lives. And there's a few categories of connections that are especially important to having a meaningful life, and these are what have been under threat in recent decades. Most importantly are our interpersonal connections, the relationships that we have in our life, that we are able to share our experiences with others, are an especially potent category of meaning for ourselves. And some kinds of relationships even more so than others, especially relationships where we take on a caretaker role, are especially important in providing a sense of meaning. So if we take care of elderly parents or our children or pets, that these kinds of relationships are especially likely to bring meaning to life. Another kind of connection that is especially important to meaning is connections with a community. that our connections with the community help provide us with a sense of identity and a sense of sort of a common purpose, and some more social connections that ground us with a place and why we're doing what we're doing. These are especially important. And connections with our work is another key source of meaning, that our work provides us with feelings of purpose, feelings that we matter, and feelings of mastery, and again, some key social connections. And a fourth category of meaning that is especially important to us are the connections with something that transcends the physical world, our connections with a spiritual realm, where we feel that our existence here goes beyond just what we can see in our everyday lives, but is connected to something broader, connecting us to something that really seems to matter. And so, if we think of these four kinds of connections as especially important to meaning, well, sadly, all four of these kinds of connections have been under assault for a number of decades around the world. The data that I talk about in my book is from the United States, which is, I think, a more extreme version of this. But I think the same kind of experience is unfolding in most countries in the world. And one, we are losing our interpersonal connections. That actually 2 years ago, the U.S. Surgeon General declared that there's an epidemic of loneliness in the U.S. And I think you can see a lot of this happening in the industrialized world, where people have fewer close friends than they did before. And they're seeing people less than they did before. They're less likely to have dinner with their families. They're less likely to get together with their neighbors. The other kind of connection are communities. These have been undermined for decades as well. That people are less likely to feel that they belong to a community. That in the U.S., at least, there used to be many sort of service clubs that people would belong to. Clubs like, I'm not sure how many of these would be in other countries, but clubs like the Rotary Club or Lions clubs, and these have largely been fading away. People aren't as engaged with the parent-teacher association. They're less likely to belong to neighborhood sports clubs. So we're just getting disconnected from our communities. People's connections with their work have been being undermined too. That people used to sort of belong to an organization for much of their life. Now people are changing jobs more frequently than before. They have a lot of side hustles going on typically. And especially with in the aftermath of COVID, remote work has become more commonplace. People are disconnected from a sense of community. And now with the specter of AI taking away our jobs, I think this is looming in the near future too, just these weakened connections with a sense of work. And last, when I talk about these connections with the spiritual realm, these too have been being undermined for decades now. Much of the world has been secularizing, and people are losing these sense of connections. And all of these connections provide a key sense of meaning, and these have been weakening. And I think because of that, we're in this existential vacuum now.
Mm. Thank you for this explanation of where we get the meaning. I remember in the beginning of your book, you mentioned about researching the goals of the young people and how the goals have changed from being more value-based into more financial goals. That would probably
Yes.
be the right way to say. So, why is this happening, and is that also like contributing to us losing meaning in life? Because financial goals are actually probably the most prevalent goals out there if we're
Yeah.
looking at people's annual goals or 10-year goals.
Yeah, I think it's really quite a striking phenomenon. Yeah, so if you went back 50 years and look at what surveys of high school students, what are their goals in life? It used to be the most common goal that people had was to have a meaningful philosophy of life and to be contributing to the world. And now that's fallen by the wayside. And yeah, people now want to be rich, they want to be famous. And I think we can understand this shift in one key way is that the most of the world has been becoming more individualistic over these decades, with the U.S. leading the way in this realm. And when a culture becomes more individualistic, it becomes much more focused. People are much more focused on themselves rather than on their social networks, rather than on their roles in the community. It becomes about me and how I'm doing. And I think, too, another factor that's contributed to this is with the rise of social media, where we are always able to see the lives of other people. I mean, if you think back in history, we used to know the lives of people in our social network. Maybe 100, 150 people is about the number that most people can keep in mind. But now we're potentially connected to everyone, and we're seeing these carefully curated lives online. Everyone's life seems better than ours, and it just is highlighting how we're not doing as well as some of the lives that we're seeing. And this is striking because over the same period of time, the world has actually gotten much richer. That in almost every country, people are doing considerably better financially than were previous generations. They have bigger houses, they have more leisure time, but we don't. But we feel poorer, and so over this time, yeah, we're sort of stuck trying to keep up with these amazing lives that other people seem to be having, and and what they don't advertise well is how meaningful their lives are. They advertise, well, oh, look at this great vacation I have, look at this beautiful house that I have, and that's what people seem to be competing on now.
I guess the role models also influence where we look for meaning. And you just mentioned social media, and I was wondering. I know in social media, for example, what happens is the unification of how we look. For example,
Mm-hmm.
people tend to the same filters, the same procedures, and people tend to start looking pretty much like clones. Does that happen with our goals and meanings in life? Do we start acquiring other people's like pictures as our own goals, like the couple's goal, the
Yeah.
career goals? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. Well, I think one thing to keep in mind is that we are ultimately a cultural animal. I think this is sort of one key factor behind our existential predicament. And as a cultural animal, what we learn from our cultures is what kind of lives are valued, what is seen as appropriate, what is not tolerated, what is abhorred. And so we do learn from others, yeah, what kinds of lives seem to be the kinds that are valued and that we should be aspiring for. And I think now, though, just because we are part of this much bigger network, that we are seeing, this, I guess, competition among these carefully curated lives about these particular kinds of role models that are especially valued, that we keep seeing, and that becomes the yardstick by which we size up our own lives, and invariably we come up short on this. That we can see people who look much more like the kind of life that we imagine we're supposed to be having. And yeah, I think there is some homogenization going on about what kind of lives seem to be valued.
So I'll ask a question, because you do talk about the so-called weird countries, or the countries
Mm-hmm.
which are Western, educated, industrialized, rich countries, and I think I'm missing one letter. Democratic, yes. I have lived 16 years in Malaysia.
Mm.
And I understand when you talk about the cultural differences between the individualistic and collectivist countries, although actually I was born and raised in Soviet Union, which was probably even more more of that non-individualistic type of approach. But you do mention somewhere in the book that the tendencies towards us becoming more individualized are actually across the whole world. How much do the other countries, let's say East Asia, which is becoming very rich,
Mm-hmm.
maybe not quite always democratic, but
Mm-hmm.
educated and rich for sure.
Yeah.
So, are these tendencies more universal, or there are still pockets of happiness out
Yeah.
there?
Yeah. Well, so it's important to note that cultures are always changing too. That they're always dynamic, and they're changing. And yes, so my colleagues and I coined this term "weird" for Western educated, industrialized, rich democratic societies. Is these are the societies that are most often studied in social science research. That the vast majority of what we know about people is really about people from these societies, and most other societies haven't received nearly the amount of attention. But the little bit of attention that has been directed to them shows quite different ways of being, and importantly, just as you mentioned, this distinction between individualistic and collectivistic societies. Places like Malaysia are, yes, much more collectivistic on average. I've spent several years living in Japan, which is also a very collectivistic society, although it has been changing, and Malaysia has, and really all the world is changing. One thing that tends to lead to more individualism is increasing wealth. And you can see this around the world as societies get wealthier. They people tend to focus more on their individualistic goals and less on their obligations towards others, less on their sense of that I belong to a social network, and it's more about, well, me trying to satisfy my desires and needs. And so this has been a shift that you can see for the last 50 years around the world. Most societies, especially industrialized ones, where that are becoming wealthier, that people have been moving in this direction. And I think there's some, every culture has its trade-offs, and individualism brings a lot of good things to people's lives. It brings a lot of freedom of choice. It often brings wealth and attention to the individual's own psychological needs, but it also comes with the isolating people and disconnecting them from many others. And on average, people living in individualistic societies report that their lives are less meaningful than those in more collectivistic societies.
It is a very interesting discussion I would like to have, but I guess I'm a little bit biased considering that I was born and raised in Soviet Union, and I would be very curious to go deeper into individualistic versus collectivistic societies. But I will not, I will not do that to our audience. What I want to do with you guys is to encourage you to get this book. It is very interesting narrative. Stephen has an amazing way of telling the story, and it actually dives very deep into how we make sense in our lives. And it combines a whole lot of different disciplines. There's a lot of philosophy, which I personally really enjoyed. And philosophers actually from the last few centuries. There is also obviously psychology and neuroscience and cultural psychology. So it is a very interesting narrative. A lot of stories of people, of actual people, actually remarkable people, not so much clients and patients, but let's say. Like the existentialists that you talk about, you don't talk about their lives as well, by the end of the book, you'll actually get to the best part, where Stephen shares how you can find more meaning in your life. In the now, for the shorter, like, fix of meaning, like the espresso, as you say, the shot of espresso in the morning, but also more fundamental ways to find meaning in your life. So very enjoyably, the book, which is very enjoyable to read. I was reading it on my trip to London, so it qualified for holiday read. For me, it's like the highest praise, Stephen, just in case, because, I have to read for work. Yeah. So, and I want to ask now the question to my guest. So you talk about the existential vacuum, and obviously not everybody is lacking meaning. A lot of us have genuinely meaning in life. Some of us maybe have goals, which maybe can substitute meaning in some cases. But how do you know when you are falling into that absurd or the lack of meaning, or maybe you are not even realizing that this is the situation where what you're missing is just meaning, and you think maybe you're missing something else?
Yeah, that's a great question. So research on meaning in life finds that it has three facets. It continually points to these three facets. One of these is the sense of having coherence in one's life, that one's life seems to make sense. You reflect on your life, everything kind of makes sense. The different parts of your life aren't in contradiction with each other. They sort of exist in harmony. So that's one key aspect of feeling that life is meaningful and you're not in the absurd. A second key facet is to feel that one has a sense of purpose, that you have a reason why you're doing what you're doing, that there's some overarching purpose that's motivating you. And so that, that each of your actions here has some underlying key goal that you're trying to achieve. And a third key facet of meaning is having the sense that one's existence matters, that your time here on Earth matters in some ways. It can matter both locally, in the sense that the people who you're connected to, that your contributions in life is having an impact, making a difference to them, but also in a more sort of spiritual sense too, that one's existence matters in the grand scheme of things. And so people who feel these sort of three different facets of meaning, that life makes sense, that you have a purpose, and you feel that your existence matters, tend to feel that their life has more meaning. And if you feel that you're lacking these elements here, then you're probably more likely to be sometimes, feeling that you are stuck in the absurd, where you're questioning, what is the point of things, where you're questioning if your life makes sense. And this is really common for many people. It's also quite unfortunate, because a sense of meaning in life is really quite important. And one thing that it's important for, it helps to protect us against feelings of anxiety that we have. That it's like a buffer that protects us from the slings and arrows that society is throwing at us. And so I think it's not a coincidence that at this time where sense of meaning is particularly low, that people are feeling especially anxious these days.
So you do talk about the age of anxiety, in fact, the new age of anxiety. So since we've already touched upon that, what is the danger of actually losing meaning in your life? What can go wrong?
Yeah, well, this is where it gets dark, because, as I was saying, like, meaning in life is especially important for protecting us from anxiety. People who feel that their lives are less meaningful are more likely to view themselves as to feel depressed. They're more likely to feel boredom. Boredom is the one key thing that comes about when people are feeling that life is meaningful. Like, you're not sure why you're doing what you're doing. Nothing seems to interest you. And at worst is the risk for self-harm, that when people's lives are feeling as empty and pointless and meaningless as they sometimes can, then people are at risk for self-harm. So it is of great importance to try to build a sense of a more meaningful life.
I actually noticed that there were quite a few references to suicide in your book. In fact, it started with an ape who jumps. And for those
Mm-hmm.
people who haven't read the book, Stephen is talking about how, there are, of course, similarities in the way in the way our brains work compared to the apes, but we are the only ape on the planet who is capable of suicide. And these are very interesting topics, including the one topic that I was super interested to read was about our facing of our mortality and the ending of life. But I'm not going to go into these topics. In fact, guys, I'm leaving some of the interesting topics for you to discover and read the book. What I wanted to ask, I'll show the book once again. And well, actually, Stephen, you have the beautiful version of the book, the one which is on paper. Could you show it just so that we have this nice picture too?
There we go.
Hey. Yeah, so what I wanted to ask, and that's probably coming a little bit back, you were talking about, how people know that they have meaning in life. You talk about these situations where sometimes when we find ourselves in the absurd, or in other words, when things stop making sense for us, we actually double down on what we know is true or what we believe. How to make a distinction between you actually being passionate about having this purpose in your life, or being having a meaningful life, versus you resorting to being extra passionate about your meaning to defend yourself from something. How do you make the difference between the two?
Yeah, that's really interesting question. One, I'm not so sure if there is such a key difference between this, because the meaning that we have is always subjective. It's always the meaning that we can see, right? It's not for someone else to say, "Oh, Christine, you have this much meaning in your life. Your life is so meaningful." It's really what you feel about it. And but yes, what much of our research has found, that when people are in a situation where where they feel meaningless, we actually try to induce this feeling in laboratories in some of our studies, have people confront things that they can't make sense of, where things stop making sense. And we've done this in a variety of ways. My favorite is when we have people interact with an experimenter, and then as they look away, we quickly swap the experimenter for another person. And people remarkably don't notice this, don't consciously notice this, but somehow something in their mind is telling them this is not right, and they feel sort of alienated from the situation. And that after that, we give them some surveys to complete, we find that people become a more exaggerated version of themselves. Liberals become more liberal, conservatives become more conservative, religious people become more religious. And it's by sort of doubling down into our beliefs, the kinds of values that we adhere to, we sort of return to a place where the world makes sense. And this is where we like to hang out after we've encountered things that are especially threatening to us, things that we're unable to make sense of. So I would say, yes, we have our passions that, if we're lucky, I think we have our passions. But what drives those passions? Some of those things that drive us might be sort of some defenses about, ways of finding a stable place, things that provide us with a source of meaning in response to threats in the world. Or it could be that we have these not in response to threats, but just as a more sort of genuine inspirations that we have. But I think psychologically, at the experiential level, there's not that much difference between this. We're not so good at identifying what is a rationalization that we have, and what is reality. It's because we're always perceiving it from our subjective perspective. We can see other people's rationalizations. We can see that person has a rationalization, but we're quite blind to our own. And I don't mean to say, suggest that I actually don't think rationalizations are as bad as I think they're often sort of described as. I think they are a tool that help us to feel that we are leading a coherent, meaningful life story. They help tie the whole story together. So I think we're quite dependent on our rationalizations that as they help to provide us with a sense of meaning.
So the two things I wanted, as I was listening to your answer, that I wanted to also highlight about the book is one of them. It's very scientifically sound, which I really enjoyed. The experiments that you describe are so awesome. And the best part is that, if you are a little bit terrified of science because it's just too hard, no, in this book, the science is actually made very enjoyable. But the other thing which I really enjoyed about your book is, as I was reading it, very often when you read nonfiction, especially self-help books or even books like, let's say, in business and marketing, they come across as didactical, like what's the right way. There, you can tell that the author tells you, don't do this, do that. As I was reading your book, it was like a little bit liberating in the sense that, oh, we're so weird, but you're not saying that this is bad. It might be actually not bad at all. Like rationalization. I know in this part about relationships, one of the interesting ideas was that rationalizing your love might actually be the thing that keeps you in the marriage, if that's what you want to do. What inspired or propelled you to write the book?
Well, I would say that one thing, I wrote this book during the pandemic. I started this in 2020 at a time when things felt very meaningless and disoriented as the whole world went through. So I would at least say that this book actually helped provide me with a sense of purpose and a sense of meaning, and it was very helpful in sort of my own life journey. But this is a research question, though, that I've been working on for 20 years now, and it actually originated out of my research in cultural psychology, where I do a lot of cross-cultural experiments. I compare Canadians and Americans to often to Japan, where I spend a lot of time. And we always find these differences, and try and explain this, sort of realizing that ultimately what these cultural differences are is that people live in these sort of different ecologies of meaning, that the same action means something different in Japan than it does in Canada. And that sort of led to this line of research of how is it that people derive meaning in their daily lives? How are they able to get a sense of meaning, and how are they able to maintain meaning? And I've always wanted to share this, the discoveries that we've made on this topic. And it was during COVID that it became just especially urgent that that the world seemed to be going through a crisis of meaning. Myself going through the pandemic, it was a time where meaning was in short supply, and so I thought that was the time where I felt very motivated to go ahead and write it. How do we deal with the fear that nothing we do will really matter or will last? And I'm going to answer this in sort of two ways. One thing about this, I think this reflects a concern. Part of the human predicament is that like all animals around the world, we are mortal, and we're someday sadly going to reach the last page of our life story. Where humans are different from other animals, though, is that we seem to be the only animal that's ultimately aware of this, that we know that we're going to die. It seems that around the ages of 9 or 10, kids start to have this realization. And from what we can tell, chimpanzees don't seem to have this. They know that other animals, they know that other chimps die, and they mourn them. But to make that intellectual leap that I'm going to die, that someday this is all going to come to an end. How do we cope with this? And this is something that the original existentialist philosophers gave devoted quite a bit of time to, and there's been a lot of research on this, which it's really quite fascinating research in something called terror management theory, and it's about how do we deal with this existential terror that we won't last, that everything that we do is ultimately going to come to an end. All the relationships that we have are ultimately going to come to an end. And what this research points to is sort of two strategies, unconscious strategies that humans rely on. One of these is what is called a drive for symbolic immortality. That because we know that we are mortal, we know that our lives will end. We try to align ourselves with a more immortal kind of entity, and that is our cultures. That we are aware that our cultures will continue to exist even after we die. And so one response then that people have to reminders of their mortality, and that's what happens in these studies. People are asked to reflect on the fact that one day you're going to die. What do you think is going to happen after you die? That's researchers ask people to think about that. Those thoughts are in their head. And what people usually try to do then is try to become more. They try to think of themselves in ways more closely to their cultural ideals, and they want to also defend their cultures. That they think their cultures are a meaningful drama, and that they're playing a key role. So one kind of response people will have is they'll become more patriotic. You remind them someday you're going to die. People become more patriotic. They tend to think that they are a better exemplar of their cultural values than other people. And they also tend to think, there's a dark side to it too, that their culture is better than other cultures. They show more of this sort of, we're the chosen people, we're the good people. And these kinds of reactions come after people think about their death. The second kind of reaction is that people pursue literal immortality. And it's pretty limited with our options for actually having literal immortality, but we tend to rely on something that every society has found, that every society that's ever existed that we know of has some kind of religious, spiritual beliefs, some kinds of beliefs that there's more to this world than meets the eye, that there are other realms. And most of these have explicit beliefs about that there is an afterlife of some kind, that one's existence continues to exist afterwards. And a lot of research finds that these values, these beliefs are especially important. They help people to feel that they matter, and they help people to feel that their lives are more meaningful. And when people face certain threats, when there's when people feel that they're threatened by war, by disease, or by anything that seems to be putting their lives at risk, people tend to embrace these beliefs more strongly and come to feel that they matter more, and that this helps to enable them to feel that what they are doing, that they're part of some big drama here, and that they're playing a key role, and that their life does matter. So you see these in every society that's been identified. There's estimates that there's more than 10,000 different kinds of religions in the world right now, even though there's only a few that command the most adherents, most membership. But these beliefs are found everywhere.
And obviously, if we are talking about meaning in life, this book does occasionally touch upon uncomfortable topics. And I guess, according to the book at least, whenever we're faced with our mortality, it's the moment where we actually start feeling uneasy, and that's where we can lose meaning. Now, that leads me to the question I was very curious to ask, because you do touch upon topics which are not scientifically proven, as you say, also, and I guess that makes it hard for some people, especially more pragmatic people, to face these existentialist threats. I understand a lot of existentialists couldn't come to terms with the fact that there's death. But you say in your book that it's okay that science can't explain everything, which is very interesting because your book reads as a science book throughout until the very end. You see that actually, despite how cool science is, it can't explain all the things. So how did you come to this acceptance of something out there which we don't really know how to explain? And how do you reconcile it with your very strong scientific background?
Yeah. So yes, I am very committed to science, and I was raised Christian, Baptist actually, but at the age of 15, I sort of abandoned the family religion, and it just didn't seem to answer the important questions to me. There's many aspects of it that I didn't like. However, for me personally, at least, I've always felt that there's something more than what meets the eye out there. And a recent study that we had done really sort of called attention to this, the limits of the scientific method. And so we did a study where our participants were scientists, and we had over 500 scientists from the U.S. And we asked them questions about their commitment to certain kinds of scientific beliefs. One we called scientific reductionism. That's the belief that everything can ultimately be explained in terms of atoms and molecules and universal laws operating. And what we found among these scientists, that the more they adhered to this worldview, this materialistic worldview, that everything is ultimately atoms and molecules, the less was their meaning in life. They reported lower meaning in life. Whereas those scientists who said, well, maybe there's something more, I can't say for sure, that they tended to feel more of a sense that their lives mattered, and more of a sense that life was meaningful. And I borrowed a page from Soren Kierkegaard, who gave us the expression in English, a leap of faith. And he was, a brilliant, rigorous thinker who was also very religious. And he realized there's a big gap here, that his religious belief he couldn't square with his rational, hard-thinking scientific worldview. And he argued there that, you just need to leap to faith. You need to sort of just take, even though your reason only takes you so far, your reason can't explain your spiritual beliefs, that you need to commit to them. And I think I argue and say that, well, we should leap to meaning, and with the idea being that there are limits to science, that the kinds of questions that science can't explain is, why are we here? Why is there anything and not nothing? we have learned a lot about the universe, but there's a lot more that we are just unable to really learn. And I question whether we'll ever have good answers to the questions of why are we here, what is happening here beyond the world that we can actually see and measure. And I think if you take an attitude that where you are looking that life can be more meaningful, that's sort of the outlook that you have, that there is meaning inherent in life, and if that's the attitude that you go about your daily life with, you will see more meaning out there. That if you are open to the idea that there is a grander scheme of things, that there is what is happening out there is fundamentally meaningful, you will perceive that more in your own life. And our other research suggests that any kind of spiritual belief that we've measured is associated with greater feelings of meaning in life, whether these are feelings of karma, whether these are feelings of universal connectedness, the law of attraction, even superstition, that these kinds of beliefs suggest that there's more to the world than what meets the eye. And that people who have these beliefs report that they feel that their lives are more meaningful. So I encourage people to be open. That doesn't mean you have to embrace everything that comes by. There's a lot of stuff out there that you're going to think is ridiculous that you just can't get connected with. And yes, ignore that. But whenever you come across something that does seem to fit with your worldview, but that does suggest that there may be a little more out there than what meets the eye, I encourage you to be open-minded to that, because these kinds of beliefs and these kinds of experiences, mystical experiences, tend to provide people with this sense that that there's more meaning in the world out there. We're part of something much bigger, and that gives us that sense that we matter.
I wanted to say that actually what I particularly enjoyed about the book was that it has a very uplifting conclusion, which is incredibly nice, because it does touch upon some very uncomfortable topics, and you will find your level of discomfort. You know, I might be discomfortable with one thought, you might be with another one, but it has an incredibly uplifting message at the end, which I think is amazing. Now, the question I wanted to ask you, I had to touch upon it. So in one of the last chapters, you are giving people very practical ways to connect back with meaning. So if you guys are interested in the topic, do get the book, read to the end, because the end gives you the practical, very practical solutions. And one of the solutions which did catch my eye, and I wanted to ask you about it, was the psychedelics. Not a very common topic in scientific literature, quite common in Mindvalley, though. That's why I wanted to touch on it. How did you? What compelled you to look into that? Because you do mention in this portion that it is there is not much scientific research yet, and in many countries it might be also related to dangers in terms of not being legal. So why there, and what's the potential there?
Yeah. Well, I talk about psychedelics in the context of talking about general ways of transcending oneself. That what our research and other people's research shows is that when people feel that they can transcend themselves, meaning that they feel that they are more connected to the grand universe around them, they feel that their lives are more meaningful. And you can achieve this feelings through mindfulness meditation, through spiritual rituals, even going out in nature, but also through psychedelic drugs. And there's a new paper that just came out by some of my colleagues in the economics department at UBC, University of British Columbia, of all places, economics department. But they went to ayahuasca rituals in Brazil, and they at the rituals they were able to get participation from participants who agreed that they were in a randomized control trial where half of them got ayahuasca as they expected, and the other half got a placebo. And anyways, what this research found which aligns with research found with other kinds of psychedelics, is that 70% of their participants described this as one of the top 5 most meaningful experiences in their lives, that it made them aware of how they're connected to things beyond themselves. And that's what a lot of research on psychedelics is pointing to. It provides people with a sense that that the world is all interconnected, and that they are connected to things much grander, beyond themselves. There are risks with taking psychedelics, and one being the legal risk, but also I should highlight that all of these studies with that actual laboratory studies with psychedelics, they exclude people who have any kind of history with psychotic conditions. Because of the real concern that these could trigger some of those conditions. So I don't mean to be cavalier about the risks associated with them, but in North America right now, there's at almost every university there are studies going on with psychedelics now as a matter of treatment, and with very promising results. The big challenge, and this is why the key reason why in the U.S. the FDA, the Federal Drug Administration, has not approved them yet for a treatment of conditions like PTSD, is you can't do the scientific gold standard is in the randomized control trial is comparing a drug to a placebo, null effect, but people can tell, they're aware which condition they're in. Usually this is the real drawback of it, right? That because these drugs are so powerful that they know when they've got the placebo. There's efforts to try to make placebo that seems like they have psychoactive properties, like this ayahuasca study that I just talked about had that. And so anyways, that's one of the limitations, is how much of this might be what people's expectations are involved with this, because they're aware that I think I'm in the condition with the drug because I can feel its psychoactive properties. But nonetheless, there's a lot of excitement about the potential for this research. I think there's a lot of hype about it too. So I think we should be cautious in interpreting these results in these early days. But what is just a very common 70% of the sample in this ayahuasca study found, and this is 6 months later, found that people are reporting that this was one of the most meaningful experiences in their lives. And so yeah, that's why I talked about this as one of the many ways of trying to transcend oneself.
I'm going to do the traditional. I have to show the book once again, and do invite you to get the book. If you're watching it in recording, you will find the link to the book under the video. Do leave a heart for my guests, please, in your chat. And if you're watching it in recording, still leave a heart under the video, because it always helps. I think love transcends everything. And the last question, my traditional question to Stephen, is how would you like your book to change the world?
What I would like, what I'm trying to do with this book is provide people with a awareness of this scientific foundation of meaning and how we can pursue meaningful lives. And I hope in reading it that people will try to build more of a sense of meaning in their own lives, that they'll take some practical steps towards gaining a deeper sense of purpose and feelings that one matters. And so I hope by doing so that there will be a worldwide increase in the amount of meaning in the world among people who read this book. So that's what I'm hoping for.
Thank you so much. And I personally can see a lot of side effects also to the main message of your book, because I enjoyed this book so much, and I really encourage you guys to also give it a try. And I think it's very wonderful to ponder some of the most important questions in our life, and to do it in the safe environment of reading a book by such a wonderful person, Stephen Heine. Thank you so much for joining. And for those of you guys who are watching it in recording, thank you for joining. Who are not part of Mindvalley Book Club yet, do sign up, because we have, we do reviews of the best books that are being published right now. And then of those books, and it's thousands, we pick the book of the week for an interview. So I don't tire to say I have access to the world's best authors. So see you again. Thank you, Stephen, once again. Thank you, everyone. And see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks for having me.